Welcome to our channel. Hollywood Movie Review. Boy Kills World 2023 Movie Review. Boy Kills World is a 2023 dystopian action comedy film starring Bill Skarsgård. Directed by Moritz Mohr, in his feature directorial debut, the film's supporting cast includes Jessica Rothe, Michelle Dockery, Brett Gelman, Isaiah Mustafa, Yayan Ruhian, Andrew Koji, Charlotte Copley, with Famke Janssen, and features the voice of H. John Benjamin. The plot revolves around a campaign of vengeance enacted by a martial arts expert, rendered deaf-mute by an attack that killed his entire family, whose thoughts are presented as an inner voice derived from a childhood video game. Boy Kills World had its world premiere at the 2023 Toronto International Film Festival, and was released in the United States by Lionsgate Films and Roadside Attractions on April 26, 2024. A spin-off video game, Super Dragon Punch Force 3, was released on April 24, 2024, and an animated series is in development. Boy, a young child, lives in a dystopian city with his mother and younger sister Mina. Boy and Mina often play arcade games and draw illustrations of their future. The city is ruled by the van der Kooi family, Gideon, Melanie, Melanie's husband Glenn, and the former two-sister and the head of the family, Hilda. Once a year, Hilda gathers 12 people from the city to participate in the culling, where all 12 are killed on live television. Hilda gathers Boy, Mina, and their mother and shoots Mina and their mother, killing them, but leaves Boy for dead, having made him deaf and mute. An unnamed shaman finds Boy and nurses him back to health. Years later, a fully grown Boy continues training with the shaman in the hopes of exacting revenge and constantly hallucinates Mina. In the city, Boy sees Glenn and Gideon arrive to round up the victims for that year's culling. After being heckled by a woman in the crowd, Glenn accidentally shoots a civilian, triggering a massacre at the hands of June 27, the van der Kooi's enforcer. Boy follows them in the trunk of Gideon's car to a warehouse, where he is attacked by Glenn and several of his men. Boy kills the men and befriends a captive named Basho, with whom he interrogates Glenn. Glenn reveals that Hilda hosts a party before the culling every year and offers to help them, but is killed when Basho accidentally drops a vice he is holding onto Glenn's head. Basho takes Boy to meet the resistance, but discovers that everybody has been killed by the van der Koois except one member named Benny. The three sneak into the manor and Boy makes his way to Hilda's dining room, where he unwittingly decapitates a decoy of Hilda. Gideon reveals that the party is a scripted ruse orchestrated to trap anyone who may want Hilda dead, and Boy is subsequently captured by June 27 after a vicious duel. Gideon reveals that he wishes to help Boy. Hilda has created the culling to protect herself from the shaman, but has been living in a bunker for years, mindlessly killing innocents even though all of the criminals have been wiped out. Melanie takes Boy to the culling and Boy uses a scalpel given to him by Gideon in secret to free himself, reuniting with Basho and Benny. A large battle ensues, during which Benny sacrifices himself to protect Boy, and Basho is mortally wounded. Boy executes Melanie and makes his way to Hilda's bunker together with Basho, where Boy is so focused on killing the guards that he misses Basho dying from his wounds. Boy discovers Gideon, having been shot by Melanie, who gives him a key card to the elevator down to the bunker. The hallucination of Mina begs Boy not to kill Gideon, but Boy executes him and the hallucination disappears. In the elevator, Hilda confronts Boy through a camera and microphone. Boy shows Hilda a drawing by Mina, horrifying her into ordering the guards outside to stand down. June 27 takes Boy to Hilda, where Boy sees paintings of the van der Kooi family, which include him and Mina. Hilda reveals that Boy is her son, and he recalls that she forced him to kill dissidents, including the shaman's entire family. When Boy refused to shoot the shaman and fled, the shaman captured him, mutilated him, and used LSD and psychological torture to brainwash him into believing that Hilda killed his family. June 27 is revealed to be Mina, who is still alive. In shock, Boy cannot give Hilda any signs of affection and she orders June 27/Mina to kill him, only for her to stab Hilda in the head with one of her hatchets, leading their great-grandmother to order the guards to kill them before dying. Brother and sister battle their way through the remaining guards before being confronted by the shaman. The three have a lengthy and brutal fight before Boy fatally stabs the shaman with his own sharpened necklace. Boy and Mina, both bleeding profusely but alive, exit the bunker. A flashback shows the two playing the arcade game, where the voice announces, "Player 2 has entered the game." In the post-credits scene, Boy and Mina are revealed to have survived and are shown eating cereal together at their childhood home. Director and story writer Moritz Mohr pitched Boy Kills World with a short and previsualization reel to Sam Raimi and Roy Lee, of Raimi Productions and Vertigo Entertainment respectively, who were impressed and subsequently agreed to produce alongside Nthibah Pictures and Hammerstone Studios. Orion Pictures was initially involved, but dropped out following the COVID-19 pandemic. The film was announced on October 7, 2021, with Bill Skarsgård, Samara Weaving, and Yayan Ruhian joining the cast. In a statement, Nthibah CEO Simon Swart said the film would combine real-world themes with a stylized look that is fresh, cool, and original, borrowing from the best of graphic novels. On October 28, 2021, Isaiah Mustafa joined the cast. In January 2022, Andrew Koji was added to the cast, and Jessica Rothe replaced Samara Weaving, who dropped out of the project due to scheduling conflicts. Filming began in Cape Town, South Africa, on February 14, 2022. In March 2022, Famke Janssen, Brett Gelman, Charlotte Copley, Quinn Copeland, twins Cameron and Nicholas Crovity, and Michelle Dockery were confirmed to star. In August 2023, Swedish composer Ludwig Forsell was announced to compose the film's soundtrack. The film also features 9 pieces of additional music by L. Michaels Affair. The world premiere for Boy Kills World was held at the 2023 Toronto International Film Festival on September 9, 2023. The film was theatrically released in the United States on April 26, 2024, by Lionsgate Films and Roadside Attractions. Boy Kills World grossed $2.6 million in the United States and Canada, and $643,341 in other territories, for a worldwide total of $3.3 million. In the United States and Canada, Boy Kills World was released alongside Unsung Hero and Challengers, and was projected to gross $2 to $3 million from 1,993 theaters in its opening weekend. The film made $819,000 on its first day, including $500,000 from preview screenings. It went on to debut to $1.6 million. On the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 58% of 170 critics' reviews are positive, with an average rating of 5.6/10. The website's consensus reads, bolstered by Bill Skarsgård's all-in performance, Boy Kills World may offer just enough action thrills to offset its thinly written characters and predictable plot. Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 47 out of 100, based on 27 critics, indicating mixed or average reviews. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of B, on an A+ to F scale, while those polled by PostTrack gave it a 71% overall positive score, with 50% saying they would definitely recommend it. The Guardian's Catherine Bray gave the film 3/5 stars, writing, "Skarsgård is a treat in the role, the character is deaf and mute, so his performance approaches something of a lethal Buster Keaton. Unfortunately, you will often find yourself hoping the film can match his level." Tim Roby of the Daily Telegraph gave it 4/5 stars, saying it was pushy and zany and maybe won't stand a rewatch, but maybe it will. The game physicality of it won me over. The Globe and Mail's Radhi and Simon Pillai called it a cheeky post-Deadpool comedy, irreverent to a fault, with grindhouse aesthetics that tend to feel inspired by Quentin Tarantino rather than the movies that inspired Quentin Tarantino. The Age's Jake Wilson gave it 2.5/5 stars, writing, Have I grown jaded? Maybe so. But it could be, too, that Boy Kills World suffers from the wrong kind of excess, not just in its approach to action but in the design of the plot, which piles one gimmick on top of another. Sophie Butcher of Empire wrote, despite some fun action excess and an impressively committed performance from Bill Skarsgård, Boy Kills World is a muddled, tiring mess, favoring violent shocks over cohesive storytelling. She gave it 2/5 stars. A spin-off video game, Super Dragon Punch Force 3, based on the arcade game of the same name in the film, was released on April 24, 2024. A spin-off animated television series of the film based on the in-universe arcade game Super Dragon Punch Force 3, written by Mario Carvalho and Judd Fitzjohn, is in development as of April 2024. He doesn't have a name more than that. Or, if he does, he sure ain't telling. His current guardian has done his level best to strip away all his memories. They're distractions, the shaman insists, unnecessary for what Boy is growing up to be. And what is that? A weapon. A tool for bloody, terminal revenge. Back in the day, perhaps when Boy had a name, he had a family, too. A mother. A little sister. A nice little home where Boy fondly remembers Mom cleaning the family's automatic weapons. But then came Culling Day, the annual celebration when the city's ruler, Hilda van der Kooi, gathered up a handful of her hated enemies and, well, killed M. Boy's mother and sister were on the list, apparently, and they met their tragic ends. Boy surely would have been dead, too, had he not been rescued by the shaman. But the shaman wasn't exactly a loving, kindly caretaker, either. He had about as much love for Hilda as Boy did. And soon, they embarked on the whole bloody, terminal revenge plan. Yep, Boy lost his mom. He lost his home. He even lost his hearing. But he still has a mission, to kill Hilda and her own duplicitous family. Sure, Boy watched Nina die all those years ago. He remembers it as well as he remembers anything. But Nina's not one to let a little death get in the way of brother-sister bonding time. And when Boy's ready for his blood-soaked mission, she'll be coming along, too. It's hard to enjoy revenge without a little company. Boy kills a lot of people. No spoiler there, it's kinda right in the title. The only person who believes that Boy could, do something besides kill is Boy's hallucinatory little sister, Nina. You can't just keep killing everybody, she says. And it's true. But that said, Hilda's regime could stand a little overthrowing. Hilda's ruthless, paranoid rule has stirred some justifiable anger amongst her people, and Boy falls in with a few resistance fighters. And while we might find their methods extreme, we can at least offer a golf clap for their war against a greater evil. Boy's guardian might be called a shaman, but his spiritual bona fides seems to be lacking. And outside that character name, the only real hints of spirituality we see are in the appearances of Nina, which even Boy acknowledges are hallucinatory, not visits from a ghost. She does make a reference to magic, saying that nobody understands how it works. That's why it's called magical, she confidently points out. Boy goes shirtless at times, and a female character wears a midriff-bearing top. Boy seems attracted to a female flower seller for about a half a minute, and Nina remarks on how pretty someone is. In a flashback, the 11 or 12-year-old Boy attends a tea party thrown by his little sister, who's probably about 8 years old, wearing a skirt over his pants, and a tiara for the event, which I interpreted as just Boy playing a role that Nina wanted him to play. Later, someone puts lipstick on the adult Boy in preparation for an appearance on camera so Boy doesn't kill the whole world. But between himself, his friends and his opposition, the body count here is fairly extraordinary. Dozens upon dozens of people meet their bloody ends, often due to a well-placed bullet and accompanied by a splash or, depending on the gauge and number of shots fired, explosion of blood. I won't detail every casualty here, but I will mention some of the more notable ones. One man apparently high on something continues to fight despite breaking a bone or two, having his jaw pulled from its hinges and, ultimately, losing a couple of limbs. One of those limbs, his arm, he rips off himself, caught in a door of some kind. He twists his body free from the trapped appendage so he can keep fighting. A guy has his skull crushed by a heavy bit of machinery. We see the resulting mess. A man has both his arm and foot severed before being executed. Someone gets skewered and killed by a camera boom. A handful of heads are cleaved from their bodies. We see a corpse hanging from a tree, along with a still living person struggling to stay alive. A hatchet point lands in someone's forehead, ultimately killing that person. A man has hooks placed in his mouth, with the intent clearly to rip the man's face apart by the cheeks. The camera turns away from the scene, but someone who did see the act vomits messily. Someone is perforated by point-blank blasts from a machine gun. Several people are dispatched via a huge sledgehammer. Someone is stabbed in the neck with a fake carrot. Knives slice throats. Swords skewer torsos. People are stabbed in the face. Necks are broken, as are plenty of other bones. A number of vicious, grotesque wounds do damage before death, usually, follows. Several people, for instance, are oakily wounded with a hand grater. Someone is overcome by a giant pineapple. Unfortunate captives wear shock collars that are activated at crucial moments. A leg and arm are wincingly sliced, lengthwise. One person's cheek is grotesquely cut. In flashback, we see boy's mother and sister killed. While the shooting mostly takes place off-screen, we repeatedly see Nina's hand slip out of boy's own, indicating the moment of death. These and other scenes of violence perpetrated against children can be particularly difficult to watch, as can the anguished pleas for mercy from family members. We see how boy loses his hearing, a red-hot poker is stuck into his ears. Boy's training was, by any standard, fairly abusive. We see him spar painfully and close to lethally with the shaman in flashback. The shaman also often buried boy in mud, forcing him to lie underneath the dirt and breathe through a bamboo tube. Boy is knocked back from the recoil of a gun he fires, and he's knocked around by a rolling statue head. He tells the audience that the only real fun he had back in the day was from his Beatle fight club, with the Beatles named Gabe and Alfonso. Alas, boy picks up the corpse of one, marking the end of said fight club. We see the carcasses of what appear to be goats. A butcher slices out the tongue of one. People are thwacked in the genitals, and at least one man is shot there, the bullet going up through the body and out the skull. Boy discovers a body in a car trunk. There's a crude reference to someone feeling butthurt. In yet another flashback, Boy and Nina walk up to a statue of Hilda. Nina holds up one of her hands, fingers splayed out, and she tells Boy that she gave her the middle finger 5 times, because it's all 5 fingers at once. Both spend quite a bit of time giving the statue that same 5-fingered salute. The shaman's main claim to shamanism would seem to be his heavy use of psychedelics. He smokes something with psychotropic properties almost every evening, if Boy's flashbacks are anything to go on, blowing smoke in the tween Boy's face and causing him to hallucinate, too. Those hallucinations can be extraordinarily bothersome. One involves a hand reaching out of the shaman's mouth, another his head enwreathed by other mouths, a third features several eyeballs sprouting and falling from the shaman's eye sockets, as if he were laying eggs through his skull. Teeth fall out and run across the ground, laughing. The shaman simply laughs throughout all of these visions. A couple of characters inhale what appears to be a very powerful stimulant, so powerful that it keeps the inhaler operating far after his wounds should have cowed him. See the first paragraph of violent content for more details. Several other people drink, and one character swigs from an ever-present flask regularly. Other characters smoke. Boy chews up and swallows a cigarette. As mentioned, someone vomits at the sight of a particularly grotesque death. Hilda van der Kooi and the rest of her family are pretty loathsome rulers, and the society they've fostered is horrifically unfair. People lie and betray. Boy Kills World is as simple as its title suggests. Taking its cues from boss-heavy video games and blood-drenched graphic novels, this film, the directorial debut of Mohr, is a frenetic fever dream that's all style, anti-substance. And, as a Christian movie reviewer, that's one of the few notches of merit I can give it. That fact is not good for you. But it is good for me. I don't have to plumb the grim story's depths for spiritual meaning or talk about its socio-political asides. It's simple, straightforward and, oh, ever so salacious. It showers its sets with blood. It thrills in its unlikely death instruments. Its body of work consists, mostly, of actual bodies. As such, I can save my dwindling gray matter for other reviews. It might be just me, but it feels like we're seeing more films like these, films that implore us not to take all the blood and guts too seriously. Laugh through the eviscerations. Chuckle through the beheadings. If those films are growing in popularity, it seems that very popularity may say something about the trajectory of our society. But we'll leave that speculation for another review. Boy Kills World is as good as its name. Or rather, as bad. If the bombastic entertainment as control scenarios of The Running Man, 1987, and the Hunger Games franchise weren't broad enough for you, there's Boy Kills World, whose manic bloodshed, arch characters, and larger-than-life aesthetics pummel the face of subtlety or even satire. The movie offers a compendium of nerd illusions that, when assembled, feel Frankenstein together in a manner shamelessly designed to appeal to various subcultures. Fans of anime, graphic novels, high-octane martial arts movies, sci-fi dystopias, adult animation, and video games will surely recognize the influences here. Doubtless, for many, the movie will play like a greatest hits album comprised of familiar cinematic and genre flourishes, assembled with goofy outlandishness meant to delight and thrill. But with a screenplay by Arend Remmers and Tyler Burton Smith that speaks down to the lowest common denominator, the movie's kinetic energy and dark humor don't offer much besides a few momentary shocks. The rest consists of thin characters, predictable plotting, and zippy filmmaking, all of which feel hollow. That's not to say Boy Kills World is without merit. Mohr, making his feature directing debut, assembles an impressive cast and a serviceable premise. Bill Skarsgård plays Boy, who is deaf and doesn't communicate verbally. Motivated by a traumatic past, he vows revenge on his world's resident dictator, Hilda van der Kooi, Famke Janssen. Hilda, joined by members of her authoritarian family, among them Charlotte Copley, Michelle Dockery, and Brett Gelman, has kept order with an annual culling event where various citizens are executed before an audience as a national sacrifice. Boy lost his younger sister Mina, Quinn Copeland, at a culling some years ago, and ever since, he's been training in the jungle with a shaman, Yayan Ruyan, from 2011's The Raid, Redemption, a skilled martial artist who has carved Boy into an instrument shaped for a singular purpose to take down the entire Van der Kooi clan in the most violent ways imaginable. After honing his body into a weapon, complete with glistening muscles that draw the camera's conspicuous attention, Boy sets out on a haphazard mission to take down the government. While that setup and worthy cast have the potential to unleash some actionized B-movie fun, the script and other choices exhausted my patience within the first minutes. Mohr made the choice to cast H. Jon Benjamin as Boy's inner voice. Benjamin is a well-known voice actor and comedian, popular for lending his distinct, deep yet somewhat nasal sound to memorable characters on various animated series, Adult Swim's home movies, 1999 to 2004, FX's Archer, 2009 to 2023, and Fox's Bob's Burgers, 2011 present. He's distractingly familiar here, and the screenplay justifies his recognizable voice by suggesting Boy took the voice from a video game called Super Dragon Punch Force 2, a combination of Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat that inspires Boy to announce lines such as Round 2, Fight, and Fatality, in his head. But Benjamin's oral presence, though appreciated in his cartoon work, never becomes one with Boy. They feel oddly mismatched, which makes the character a living incongruity. However appropriate that may be for Boy from a conceptual standpoint, the reality is unsatisfying and quite loathsome. Aside from referencing games in his head, Boy also recalls the definitions of words from his other favorite pastime, reading the dictionary. When the occasion arises, Boy prattles off the meanings of words such as liminal and ameliorate, turning this movie into the cinematic equivalent of a bad high school essay. For his part, Skarsgård does well in his physical performance, offering some amusing moments of pantomime to augment his living weapon mode. And Boy must read lips to understand what's happening, though he occasionally misreads to amusing effect. Thoughtless scene blocking means he also understands what some characters say when their backs are turned. Elsewhere, Boy sees an apparition in the form of his sister to guide him along, and he befriends two crazed rebels, Andrew Koji, Isaiah Mustafa, who help him take down the Vanderkoys, upsetting their government's live broadcast of the culling. None of these characters amount to much, and they're far less charming or amusing than the filmmakers seem to think they are. Then, late in the movie, there's a saw-it-coming twist that tests our loyalties in frustrating and not compelling ways. It feels like we're rooting for the wrong people in the end, which is the rotten cherry on top of this bitter confection. While I suspect most moviegoers will celebrate Boy Kills World for its action sequences, many of which are dazzlingly presented, there's little else to savor here. Still, fight coordinator Dawid Siderski demands recognition for orchestrating impressive stunts and choreography. Mohr supports them with cinematographer Peter Majasko's digitally augmented camera work and editor Lucien Barnard's invisible cutting, which render the movie's non-stop brawling to look like the Kill Bill movies by way of Edgar Wright. But propelling the frenetic and gory violence is a hackneyed screenplay that struggles to make us care, largely because it insults our intelligence by recalling the definition of auspicious while distracting us with the misguided presence of Benjamin's voice. Though I found it kitschy, derivative, and obnoxious, I have no doubt others may eat the stuff up with the manic joy of a teen at 2 a.m. This isn't meant to sound like a slight or a knock against Moritz Mohr's wonderfully chaotic action comedy Boy Kills World, but the difference between his film being an all-time classic and just the unquestionably fun romp that it is might come down to timing. Had Boy Kills World come out earlier in this current cycle of heightened, bloody, over-the-top, high body count action extravaganzas, it might have hit just a tad bit harder. But in the wake of so many all-time classic one-offs and franchises that are starting to ebb more than they are flowing, Boy Kills World feels more like just another solid addition to the genre. It's blisteringly fun in the moment, with more than a few memorable sequences, quips, and eccentricities, but at the end of the day it's just another well-done case of more is more filmmaking. Again, not a knock. More of a personal observation, as your enjoyment of Boy Kills World comes down to how hard it hits you. Have you ever wished that The Hunger Games was a lot more like The Running Man, and that in turn The Running Man was a lot more like The Raid, and then in turn the whole thing was basically an episode of Bob's Burgers, and it was a whole video game you could play? If even part of this wild description holds some weight with you, then Boy Kills World will be quite a bit of silly fun. Is it as exhausting as that all sounds? Absolutely, but in a satisfying way, like gorging on junk food and wearing your loosest fitting pants. True to its tough-talking title, Boy Kills World is a revenge story set in a post-apocalyptic, deeply post-capitalist hellscape. Deaf and mute, the unnamed boy, Bill Skarsgård, has spent most of his adult life living in the jungle and training to become an unstoppable killing machine with the help of a mysterious shaman, the Raid's Yayan Ruhan, to avenge the murder of his family. The boy's targets are members of the ruthless, underworld ruling Vanderkoy family, led by reclusive matriarch Hilda, Famke Janssen. Every year, the Vanderkoys host a televised special event known as the Culling, where people who have crossed them will be rounded up and placed into ridiculous, deadly situations. Frustrated with not being able to seek revenge sooner and believing he's ready to rise to the challenge, the boy breaks with his master and sets off to exact his bloody will, with the Vanderkoys and their masked chief assassin, Jessica Rothe, taking notice. Mohr, adapting his own short of the same name to feature length, isn't doing much more than taking a bunch of familiar elements, tossing them in a blender to bursting, cranking it up to maximum speed, and walking away to watch everything splatter all over the walls. Boy Kills World is immature in a rather delightful way, as lizard-brained as a Saturday morning cartoon from days of old and as creatively deranged as an adult form of action movie Mad Libs. Nothing is too silly or too gory for Mohr, but it also isn't pushing things too far into outright bad taste territory. It wants to be bloody chaos, but it also doesn't want to alienate anyone, either. Part of what makes Boy Kills World work as well as it does is a big beating heart at the center of it all. Skarsgård might not be saying anything, but his body language and facial expressions nicely convey Mohr's protagonists as an orphan who struggles connecting to the world around him. The boy is also helped, and at some points, pestered, by two running commentaries in his mind. One is his guiding inner voice, provided not by Skarsgård, but by noteworthy comedian and voice actor H. John Benjamin, hence the Bob's Burgers comparison earlier. Since the boy can't remember what his own voice sounded like before losing the ability to speak, he has fashioned his conscience around the voice of an announcer he heard in a martial arts video game. The other running commentary, and more hallucinatory in nature, is provided by the ghost of his younger sister, Quinn Copeland, who sometimes advises the boy in helpful ways, but mostly just wants to play and spend time with her brother like a little kid would. These elements, and Skarsgård's physically and emotionally dialed-in performance, showcase Mohr's softer side as a director and co-writer, but this layer of emotional awareness pleasingly extends to the villains and side characters, as well. Each of the actors playing antagonists, including Brett Gelman's violent, struggling writer, Charlton Copley's flashy game show host, Michelle Dockery's catty television producer, and Rothe's conflicted hit woman, are all given moments of clarity and introspection that make things a little more interesting than their caricatured natures appear on paper. Similarly, Andrew Koji makes a big impression as the boy's greatest and most unlikely ally, a revolutionary who isn't particularly great at being a revolutionary. All of these character beats and performances help to keep Mohr's work on a steady, speedy track, as do the exceptionally choreographed fight sequences, elaborate stunts, inventive kills, sweeping cinematography, and flashes of surrealist humor, some involving serial mascots that won't be forgotten anytime soon. That all comes in handy once Boy Kills World gets around to its big twist, which ends up being both a help and a hindrance. Once the twist arrives, arguably both earlier and later than it should, depending on how one chooses to look upon it, Boy Kills World maintains momentum but becomes a fundamentally different movie from what came before it. It also raises more than a few questions about the logic of everything that came before the twist. It's a swerve that makes emotional sense, but throws off Mohr's already tenuous balance of silliness and brawn. But some viewers might just choose to go with the flow of things. I certainly did, and Boy Kills World remained consistently entertaining to the end. Before it even gets around to the dodgier storytelling stuff, Boy Kills World makes its strengths and weaknesses known to the viewer early on. It's the kind of film that you'll know within a matter of minutes if you're going to like it or not. As a fan of go-hard action yarns with a healthy dose of self-aware humor, Boy Kills World is right up my particular alley. Shame we couldn't have had something like this come a few years earlier, or maybe I would have overlooked all of its flaws entirely and just started spontaneously foaming at the mouth with deranged glee as it unfurled in all its candy-colored gory glory. In Boy Kills World, Bill Skarsgård has burning eyes and model cheekbones, sinewy arms popping out of a dirty red athletic vest, and a feral pout that makes him look like Jean-Claude Van Damme crossed with Lou Reed. He plays a deaf-mute Avenger, known only as Boy, who kills people in insanely violent ways. Yet through it all, the character retains his innocence. He's a wounded wild child in a man's body. Raised in a mountain hideaway by a martial arts trainer and resistance fighter called the Shaman, Yayan Ruyan, who may remind you, at first, of the Zen master in Kill Bill, Volume 2, Boy had his past taken away from him by a vicious totalitarian regime. During the culling, an annual ritual where law and order is maintained by having criminals confront each other in a state-sanctioned televised death match. Boy saw his little sister, Mina, Quinn Copeland, executed right in front of him. Now he's getting his payback. She keeps popping up as a ghost/hallucination who becomes his buddy. Boy Kills World is the first feature directed by the German-born Moritz Mohr, and he draws on a panoply of sources: video games and graphic novels, The Hunger Games and The Purge, the John Wick films and the decadent showpiece action fandangos of Matthew Vaughn. Yet the movie is more deliriously violent than any of them. In pursuit of his enemies, Boy slashes and gouges and decapitates. He bare-knuckle punches with a split-second intensity that magnetizes the camera to his every move. He unleashes machine gun fire with the dexterousness of a ballistic surgeon, and he doesn't just kick, he turns his body into a twirling homicidal battering ram. The action is the point, but it's not the whole point. Boy Kills World succeeds at creating a toxic cartoon fascist world. The film's astonishing levels of violence are about what it takes to overcome its version of evil. If you were asked to define the difference between the movies of the early 70s and the movies of today, the answer would be obvious. Back then, a lot of movies, even those from Hollywood, had a boldness and storytelling purity and humanity. Today, too many movies are overcooked franchise popcorn. Yet there's another way to characterize the difference. In 1971, Stanley Kubrick released A Clockwork Orange, and it's no exaggeration to say that it deeply shocked people. It was a singular and disturbing vision, a sociopathic dystopia that flirted with a kind of sick puppy voyeuristic horror. When you watched the Singin' in the Rain scene, it was extending the boundaries of how transgressive a work of art could be. So what does it say that in a movie like Boy Kills World, that level of cheeky dark sadism has been turned into a pure lark, the new extreme threshold of mainstream entertainment? The fact that this is what we now seek out for kicks may be scarier than anything in A Clockwork Orange. Yet the pop culture of the last 50 years has primed us for it: the slasher movies, the video games, the high body count delirium of the John Wick series, which may have been the first films to package this kind of relentlessness as cutthroat jollies for the megaplex. The kill spirit of John Wick made a film like Boy Kills World possible, yet Boy Kills World takes it all a step further. It's the action film as slasher movie as gonzo damaged superhero movie. It's a depraved vision, yet I got caught up in its kick-ass revenge horror pizzazz, its disreputable commitment to what it was doing. Boy, who can read lips, understands most of what's happening around him, and he reacts to events by talking directly to us on the soundtrack, in an exaggerated He-Man voice, like Mel Gibson's in Mad Max. You could say that the movie, in a way, cheats the fact that he can't speak, but Boy's quips from his inner voice lend Boy Kills World a graphic novel funkiness. Boy has gone out into the world to right its wrongs, but what's standing atop the pyramid isn't the usual stoic power addict. It's a dysfunctional family of rulers who are at each other's throats. Mohr, working from a script by Tyler Burton Smith and Arend Remmers, has fun fleshing out these Baroque villains. I enjoyed Brett Gelman as the bearded brother who's like a Diamond District chiseler who thinks he's a brilliant screenwriter, and Famke Janssen as the matriarch who's losing her mind. As the dynasty's media ringleader, Charlton Copley does his showboat thing, and gets what he deserves. Mohr stages the culling as the spectacular slaughterhouse version of a Winter Wonderland TV commercial. It's a sequence that would make Alex from A Clockwork Orange stand and applaud in glee. There's a big twist, or really, two in one. The state soldier, named June 27, Jessica Rothe, who speaks in slogans flashed onto her digital combat visor, turns out to be closer to home than we think. And a character we assume is heroic is revealed to be an emotionally broken monster. All of that succeeds in holding our attention, and the climactic fight, a threesome, is shot and choreographed with brutal visual wizardry. It's all held together by Skarsgård's performance, and the trick of it is that you never catch him playing dumb. Yet Boy is often a beat behind what's happening. That's what makes us warm up to him. He's a blood-spattered avenger in spite of himself. He turns the old ultraviolence into child's play. Sometimes you come across a movie that you know will be hard to review, as it feels like this is the exact story the director was wanting to tell. Whether it's everyone's cup of tea or not remains to be seen. Boy Kills World is easily the craziest action movie of the year. It is at times hilarious while also being a glorious splatterfest filled with over-the-top, violent fight scenes feeling like a cartoon or graphic novel brought to life. At just under 2 hours, it does begin to wear out its welcome, as the premise is thin and doesn't really stretch past the 90-minute mark. It's a straightforward revenge tale with some nice stylistic flourishes, and the voiceover for the main character known as Boy, Bill Skarsgård, provides most of the laughs. Skarsgård looks to be in the best shape of his life, as he clearly prepared for the role and is totally ripped in this movie. He gets plenty of fight scenes, however, they are a little shaky at times, which I was hoping we were past by now. Still, he is believable as Boy, and you are rooting for him all the way as he smashes, stabs, shoots, and even uses a cheese grater through his enemies. That scene is easily the action highlight for me, although the final fight is still impressive. It's nice to see Yayan Ruhian, the Raid, get such a sizable part, which I think is his best Hollywood role to date. On a random note, I'm still annoyed that The Force Awakens introduced him and Iko Uwais and then proceeded to do absolutely nothing with them. Any movie with Andrew Koji in it is immediately worth seeing, as I consider one of the most interesting action stars in the business today. Still, I wish he had more fight scenes, as he felt a little underused. Sharlto Copley is as entertaining as ever, and that's two of this year's big action pictures that he's been a part of, with this and Monkey Man, where he steals nearly every scene. Overall, Boy Kills World is at times a hilarious bloodbath of a film with some imaginative set pieces and a body count surely in the triple digits. I see it becoming a cult classic in future years, with people showing up to midnight screenings and cheering on the carnage. It's definitely worth seeing on the big screen for full effect, but it does go on a little too long, at least for me. A fever dream action film that follows Boy, a deaf person with a vibrant imagination. When his family is murdered, he is trained by a mysterious shaman to repress his childish imagination and become an instrument of death. One grating creative choice can derail an otherwise fun film. The voice of a narrator may not seem like something to get so worked up about. That whether or not I recommend this movie will come down to whatever happens as I'm writing about it, but damn, Boy Kills World director Moritz Mohr, working alongside screenwriters Arend Remmers and Tyler Burton Smith, run the joke into the ground until it may as well be one of the many mutilated bodies that end up on screen. It broke me early and often, draining enjoyment from pleasantly violent and gory mayhem that is visceral and strikingly choreographed with fast pacing and slick, swirling martial arts reminiscent movements. Every time the narration kicks in, which it sometimes does during these fights, it will likely drive one up a wall, screaming internally, "What were they thinking?" Worse, the narration doesn't entirely seem justified. Yes, the protagonist is mute and deaf, but his narration, which comes in the voice of a deep-voiced, fighting arcade game announcer, is a joke that absolutely can't sustain 2 hours. On some level, the filmmakers must be aware of this, considering that it is mostly gone by the time the more dramatic but still bloodthirsty third act arrives. The whole gimmick also feels like a strange studio note that reads, "General audiences aren't going to show up if the protagonist has no way to speak thoughts or express emotions, and the stupid people in the back might not be able to pick up on motives through visual context, so stuff it with narration." Again, they unfortunately chose the most irritating voice conceivable. This is a shame, since Boy Kills World is otherwise doing some exciting, down and dirty, pulpy, grindhouse things with its video game-like storytelling structure of a totalitarian empire getting its comeuppance one by one, boss fight style. Bill Skarsgård's eponymous Boy lost his mother and sister to that murderous regime, almost meeting the same fate before finding himself rescued by a shaman, Yayan Ruhian, who takes the boy in, putting him through rigorous combat training as he grows up. Growing up in the jungle also adds an acrobatic flair to the fight choreography when he returns to the oppressed city for revenge. The cheeky title also refers to the fact that this boy has never truly grown up. That partially explains the obnoxious voiceover while also allowing for some amusing gags, such as repeatedly getting distracted by tasty cookies and other treats, sometimes mid-fight. That's also one way of saying the sense of humor here is fine away from the narration, with some noteworthy comedic names popping up and generating laughs. Anyway, this childlike nature also manifests in some heartstring-tugging ways, such as imagining his dead sister, still young, communicating and helping alongside him. He had made her promise they would escape this nightmare and find somewhere peaceful. There is an annual tradition called the culling, headed up by Hilda van der Kooi, Famke Janssen, the psychopathic leader of this empire. It's an event where some of her remaining enemies are rounded up for execution. Naturally, Boy finds this is his window to launch an attack, battling through her henchmen relatives and hordes of generic baddies. Fights break out in various locations, from warehouses to a Christmas-decorated stage. Hallways are turned red. Jessica Rothe shows up as an ass-kicking villainess wearing a motorcycle helmet that flashes words across the glass, making for a unique method of communication, and a resistance offers support. There is variety in scenery and plenty of color, not to mention some flashy wardrobe design for each character. Most importantly, the majority of the violence is brutal and bone-crunching, culminating with a vicious final battle filled with slicing and dicing, headbutting, lost flesh, counters and reversals, and the kind of resiliency from each side that leaves one hoping the fight never ends. Admittedly, there are action sequences that are too reliant on CGI blood splatter from gunshots, but the final battle here is something much more practical and physically demanding that the actors throw everything they have into. It's a special one that almost single-handedly saves Boy Kills World from that god-awful, insufferable narration voice. The final stretch also has some emotional beats that probably would have resonated more if the film was more concerned with that than, well, do I really have to say it again? You know the story well. In a dystopian world, the despotic siblings who rule with an iron fist murder a family who opposes them. The only survivor, a young boy, left deaf and mute by the experience, trains his entire life with a very stoned shaman for a mission of revenge with only the mental incarnation of his dead sister and his internal monologue, the voice of his favorite childhood video game, for company. Yeah, that old yarn, right? And thus, we have Boy Kills World. When Boy, Bill Skarsgård, is all grown and finally has his chance to exact retribution against the nefarious Van der Kooi clan. Hilda, Famke Janssen, Primal, Glenn, Charlotte Copley, the A-Team, and Melanie, Michelle Dockery, Self/Les, and their Daft Punk helmet-wearing hired assassin, June 27, Jessica Rothe, Happy Death Day. The movie erupts into a frenetic action free-for-all full of epic fistfights, shootouts, and spurting wounds. It's also worth taking a moment to note that Boy's shaman, is played by the legendary Yayan Ruhian, The Raid, John Wick 3, and many more, always a welcome addition to any film. The action is the main product Boy Kills World and director Moritz Mohr have to sell, and the fight choreography is top-notch. Skarsgård handles himself well when it comes time to throw down, bringing a strong physicality. And seriously, them Skarsgård brothers got ABS. Ruhian is obviously one of the best currently doing it in movies. Andrew Koji, Warrior, gets in on the act as Basho, Boy's dodgy sidekick and motor-mouthed member of the Resistance. Isaiah Mustafa, Old Spice commercials, plays Benny, another Resistance fighter and the one person whose lips Boy can't read, which leads to some hilarious miscommunication and does a suitable Michael J. White impersonation. And the stunt team and reams of nameless goons are all doing a hell of a job. It all adds up to some phenomenal beatings. The way Mohr and cinematographer Peter Majasko shoot the action is heavily influenced by video games and gameplay, in how they frame fights, how the camera moves, and how characters maneuver within the shots. It's all highly stylized from the jump, and it only ramps up and progresses as the movie goes. By the time we get to the end, there's more emphasis on wild photography and cinematic tricks than the badass fight choreo. The camera swings and swoops, circling and diving in a frenzy of hyperactive motion. The climactic fights border on incomprehensible at times, and it ultimately undercuts the strong work the stunt team does. Eventually this escalation becomes too much, exhausting the viewer, and does more harm than good. The other part of the action/comedy dichotomy is, obviously, the comedy. Comedy might be the most subjective of all movie genres, and there are people who are going to adore the sense of humor in Boy Kills World and those who are not going to feel it at all. It's a very specific taste. Most of the humor comes from Boy's internal monologue, voiced by H. John Benjamin, Bob's Burgers, Archer, and primarily takes the form of a running, deadpan commentary. There's also an assist from Boy's imaginary version of his murdered sister, Mina, Quinn Copeland, a sarcastic foil who he banters with throughout. When it works, the juvenile humor adds a layer of goofy irreverence that masks deep pain. Boy never really grew up mentally, so he's stuck in a stone teenage boy mentality, unable to process his grief and trauma except with sophomoric jokes. When it misses, however, it lands with thud. Again, your mileage will certainly vary based on your own proclivities, but even then, it's so constant it wears thin after a while. And the light and breezy tone doesn't always jibe with the brutal violence. This juxtaposition works in some instances, and absolutely doesn't in others. One particular scene with a cheese grater comes to mind. The script never finds a consistent tonal balance and winds up all over the place from moment to moment. Sprinkled in throughout are more serious, weighty moments. And like many other elements, it's hit and miss. Our protagonist is obviously damaged in myriad ways. Without a word, Skarsgård gives him pathos and earnest emotionality, even as he throws hands. The film plays Boy's expressive face off the voiceover and against his fantasy sibling, sometimes to great effect, sometimes not so much. At times it takes aim at corrupt media narratives, the numbing effect of constant spectacle, and the dubious moral and ethical nature of revenge. The whole, before you embark on a mission of vengeance, dig two graves thing. There is enough weirdness, like a crew of children's serial mascots used as instruments of state-condoned corporal punishment and slaughtering political opponents on live TV, that it's not too major a hang-up. Still, as a satire, it's toothless and hollow. Overall, there's probably enough to carry most audiences through Boy Kills World. At times it calls to mind two recent Russian movies, Why Don't You Just Die and Sweetie, You Won't Believe It. In good ways. And Guns Akimbo in bad ways. Not everything is going to land for everyone, but the frustrating elements are relatively minor. Even though it's overlong, most of the runtime whips by quickly. Skarsgård proves himself a strong action banger frontman, and both Janssen and Dockery have a blast gleefully chewing every last maniacal line. The fight choreography ranks up there with the best of the year so far, and this is destined to play like gangbusters with a rowdy, fueled up late-night crowd. Several enemies of the state are murdered on live TV in a pivotal scene from Boy Kills World, a hyper-action movie about a media-addicted killer who wants to avenge his family's deaths. We don't know who these TV casualties are or what people think of their deaths, but we do know that their killers are Frosty Puff cereal mascots. This should be a spoiler, but it's not. Frosty Puffs are proud sponsors of the Culling, an annually televised flex of power organized by the insecure fascist Melanie van der Kooi, Michelle Dockery, and her family. Frosty Puffs also plays a crucial role in the over-exaggerated and underdeveloped backstory of the titular boy, Bill Skarsgård, a deaf and mute orphan who fondly remembers eating sugary breakfast cereal when he was a happy child, before the van der Kooys murdered his family. Boy Kills World is a generic programmer about one more lonely mixed media junkie who wants to murder the demagogues that he blames for ruining his life. Skarsgård's character eventually feels conflicted about his murder quest, as he tells us through overbearingly goofy voiceover narration, H. John Benjamin. But he doesn't seem to care that his beloved Frosty Puffs have partnered with the van der Kooys. And in a later scene, Boy also enjoys a bowl of Frosty Puffs. Something doesn't add up here. Boy Kills World dabbles at media criticism by fixating on the van der Kooi family's manipulation of the media. This only means so much in a gory and joyless action comedy that imagines media consumers and political dissidents as unmemorable extras. We know what Skarsgård's avenging hero wants because his stream of conscious narration never stops telling us everything he's thinking or feeling. We can also tell some things about the righteous nature of the boy's mission based on generic training montage sequences starring the raid star Yayan Ruhian. Ruhian plays an eccentric bog hermit who knows how to fight and also takes hallucinogens. The boy is also haunted by visions of his dead sister, Quinn Copeland, and she talks, too. The van der Koois are also fairly obvious. Melanie is vain and she thinks televised executions are good for her TV ratings. Her husband Glenn, Charlton Copley, is a temperamental buffoon who supposedly is, or was, popular with his wife's supporters, and Glenn's brother-in-law Gideon, Brett Gelman, is a frustrated artist, pouring his heart into pompous speeches and scripts for his uncaring family's public demonstrations. In another key scene, Melanie literally projects her insecurities onto the boy because he can't communicate verbally. Which is weird, because he still speaks a language that she's fluent in. Over-the-top violence. During manic action scenes, the cameras swoop over, under, and through teeming crowds of heavily armed and often faceless heavies. Limbs break, bodies tumble through the air, and chunks of flesh frequently explode in gouts of blood. There isn't a significant difference between the dizzying, sensational presentation of violence in any of the boys' fight scenes and, say, the above-mentioned Frosty Puffs massacre. In fact, Boy Kills World implicitly associates all violence with video games, like the Street Fighter-style fighting game that Skarsgård's character tells us he based his voice-over narration voice on. These action scenes resemble the same antic slow-fast slow pace of the Kingsman spy movie parodies and this year's Argyle. In these brain-dead media critiques, so much pseudo-comic stress is put on sweeping camera movements and impact-driven maneuvering that it reduces everything funny, upsetting, and spectacular about these scenes to its sheer numbing impact. You don't get to enjoy any of the on-screen action's flow or development because the filmmakers constantly insert themselves between you and whatever cheap thrills you might have hoped to enjoy. That creative fussiness suggests an unfortunate parallel between the makers of Boy Kills World and Gideon, who at one point bitterly tells off Dennis, Pierre Nelson, an actor stuck rehearsing one of Gideon's scripted van der Kooi spectacles. Feeling, Dennis, Gideon pouts. Surely, that metacriticism means something, like the fight scene's aggressive stylization or the connection between the van der Koois and their breakfast cereal sponsors. Well, yes and no. You can't watch Boy Kills World passively. Did Benjamin's character have to talk so much? Nor can you draw meaningful conclusions from the third act plot twists that disrupt the boys' plans for revenge. The makers of Boy Kills World don't trust their audience enough to let us just feel a feeling, nor do they encourage their enthusiastic cast members enough to deliver fully developed performances. Copley plays creepy well, Skarsgård pantomimes his butt off, and Ruhian unsurprisingly looks more convincing than anyone else tasked with executing complicated stunt work. Everything else in Boy Kills World could have been directed and scripted by the van der Koois. Boy Kills World starts off with a sort of Hunger Games vibe. There is a culling, where certain people are selected for execution against the ruling government, in this case Hilda van der Kooi, Janssen. Young boy's family is selected and his mother and sister are killed. Boy is rescued by the shaman, Ruhian, who is the long-haired guy from the raid, and taught to kill. This way, he can get revenge on Hilda and her controlling family. As Boy, now played by Skarsgård, grows up, he becomes the ultimate fighting machine. He is deaf and mute, but the voiceover in his head, Benjamin, tells his story. He's forgotten what his own voice sounds like, so he remembers it from a Street Fighter-type arcade machine. He starts to seek revenge and avenge his mother and sister's deaths. This is where the fun begins. Along the way, he has the memory of his little sister to help, and distract, him. The action in Boy Kills World is hit and miss in my opinion. Some of the stunts are epic and there are a couple of holy shit moments. The cheese grater in the armpit was one. It's the director, Moritz Mohr, who lets it down. Most of the time, the action works, but there are a lot of times it doesn't. It's either too over the top or you can't see exactly what's going on. Both John Wick and The Raid do the action perfectly. There are long takes, shots from further away, and there's nothing overly fancy about the camera work. The directors let the stuntmen do what they do. Both movies are excellent action flicks with amazing fight scenes. In Boy Kills World, it's just not hitting the spot most of the time. Some of the shots go up and over the stunt guys and just made me laugh or roll my eyes. A film like Boy Kills World has been a long time coming. It's simultaneously very generic but also a trendsetter. It'll take a little while, but let me explain. Let's head back to the 80s, and early 90s, where action films were a genre unto their own. Stallone, Schwarzenegger, Jackie Chan, Jet Li, Bruce Willis, Van Damme, Steven Seagal. There were a lot of big names, big stars in Hollywood. While Willis wasn't initially typecast in the genre, his appearance in Die Hard was rather symbolic of the time period, as the story cemented the role of the white male victim, down on his luck, just trying to get through the chaos that surrounded his character. Yet with the new millennia, audiences' tastes naturally moved away, and soon the classic action flick became more of a rarity. The Bourne films filled a void despite their lack of clarity in action sequences, fostering the popularity of spy thrillers. The Matrix was also a massive influence on pop culture, introducing some action styles from Asian cinema, such as the use of wires and bullet time, and combined them with the burgeoning field of CGI. But aside from those big hits, the action genre waned as it really became more about style over substance, not helped as the iconic actors of yesteryear aged out. Then Marvel came onto the scene and changed the industry. Typical action movies weren't as accessible anymore, as the genre quickly pivoted and became synonymous with blockbuster comic book adaptations. The big stars were no longer actors but characters. Iron Man, Captain America, etc. Yet Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans just felt different from the likes of Stallone and Schwarzenegger, although there were a few exceptions here and there: Jason Momoa, Chris Hemsworth, Henry Cavill, etc. For a while, it felt like Dwayne Johnson and Tom Cruise were the only ones keeping the more classic ideal of the action genre alive. The older action movie stars would occasionally come out to play, but it was starting to become obvious that there weren't that many clear front-runners for the next generation of your iconic action movie star. Over the past decade or more, the prevalence of identity politics shaped the narratives in cinema. Die Hard's formula was long gone, making way for new types of heroes and villains. It was fresh and exciting to see more female characters in the genre, along with more diverse protagonists. Harmfully stereotypical villains such as Russians, Asian gangs, and the Italian mafia were replaced by your more average white American male. It's one of those narrative trends that's fine in itself, though it has an obvious shelf life. Young American men, who are statistically white, are the main consumers of this genre, if we're focusing on just the domestic market and American-based productions. How long can the genre's main demographic continually absorb material that paints them as the villain until that type of storytelling begins to be rejected? While studios have tried to shift the appeal of the action genre onto new audiences, that old demographic hasn't gone anywhere in the meantime, where there seems to be diversity in every place except the villain role, as some actors from various minority groups have frustratingly pointed out of the past few years. At what point does the social pendulum swing and we circle all the way back to the Die Hard days? Of course, these are all massive generalizations, but a large portion of Boy Kills World's appreciation stems from understanding the latent desires currently simmering within cinema. Just as Hot Fuzz was the culmination of multiple tropes within the niche subgenres of buddy cop action comedies and small-town British murder mysteries, Boy Kills World is blatantly riffing off martial arts revenge movies and comic book pop. It feels directly influenced by the likes of The Hunger Games, or a splash of Battle Royale, Bullet Train, Kill Bill, and a whole host of classic martial art films like Ong Bak. Boy Kills World is literally a giant mashup of all the films Moritz admired growing up and wishes to see on the big screen once more. While an army of stormtroopers have better aim than what's on display from the legions of armed enemies in this film, Boy Kills World smartly shifts away from using CGI where it can. The fight choreography is tight, creative, and bloody. As a film, it's going to be instantly compared to Monkey Man given how close these two similar stories were released into cinemas. Yet while Monkey Man might have more drama and tension, Boy Kills World is certainly more entertaining, and its fight sequences are consistently better than its competitor. You won't look at a cheese grater the same way again. Its comic book influences are both its strength and weakness. Going back to the wider context, it has become clear that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has outstayed its welcome. They're facing a problem where some of the larger narrative arcs have already been told, and are now struggling to provide the more minor, obscure stories the relevance required to reach the heights the studio has experienced in the past. This is all balanced with the fact that it's difficult for the younger generation to become involved given the sheer amount of homework that's required to simply watch the latest film in the cinema. Their audience is essentially those that developed alongside those movies. That demographic might be weary with Marvel, but they still grew up on that diet of comic book action films, and this style of storytelling is still in that realm of comfort food. Boy Kills World speaks the same language. It deliciously takes all the tropes this demographic is intimately familiar with and has fun. However, Boy Kills World always chooses the option to play for laughs. Every time there's a moment where it could have aimed for contemplation, grief, or gravitas, it decides to take the lighter route. There's one character where the artistic choice regarding how they interact with others is genuinely hilarious, but ultimately the story does miss out on the opportunity of going deeper with its themes, and as such, it's the one area where Monkey Man comes out on top. The comic book and martial arts inspired narrative beats are old and are intended to be easily recognizable, but the presentation feels fresh. Some twists can be predicted, although there are other parts of the story that really take an interesting turn, flipping tropes on their head. Part of the reason is that it's not woke. As in, Boy Kills World is very haphazard with its messaging, unlike other films of today's era where every artistic decision feels like it has been sucked through a corporate boardroom and analyzed with painstaking scrutiny to ensure the audience is bludgeoned with the intended overt meaning behind the production. If this movie was analyzed under the same intense lens, then no doubt some offense could be taken, although such a thorough study feels like a case of overthinking things. For instance, there are some stereotypes presented in the film, ones that haven't been visited in a while, but it feels like overkill to criticize it, especially when it's clear the film is not thinking at such a deep level. One aspect that's interesting is the combination of a male protagonist, a silent white man, nonetheless, and a female antagonist. This is actually fairly rare to see. Usually in the film world, women will face off against women, or it's a female protagonist against a male antagonist. This is all due to screenwriters worrying about the unintended symbolism that could be drawn from a man besting a woman. But Boy Kills World doesn't seem to care about such things. Or if it does, it's good at hiding any deeper analogies that could be drawn from its storytelling. That is how it's both generic and a trendsetter. It knows its audience. It delivers what they've been craving. It shuns overdone CGI and impresses with slick fight choreography, all wrapped up in comic book-styled storytelling and familiar tropes, with easily recognizable pop culture inspirations. It bucks the trend of artistically deadening over-analysis by providing popcorn-fueled entertainment, deliberately revisiting the pieces of what made action movies great from yesteryear. We have finally circled back to Die Hard with our hard-done-by male protagonist, and while Boy Kills World may feel like it's riding on the coattails of John Wick, the film could possibly mark the start of a new shift in cinema, despite its lack of box office performance. That's why a film like this has been a long time coming. If one is observing the current landscape of the cinematic arts, its creation is entirely predictable. We know why it exists, but we don't know why it exists. Director Moritz Mohr has expressed his desire to create a film in the vein of the films he enjoyed watching, which explains why Boy Kills World is fun, but what does the movie actually say? Something about family. There's no real message to take home. Swinging too hard towards providing a moral will risk a film being labeled as woke, but the story does need to have some relevance in order to properly resonate with audiences, otherwise it winds up as being a puff of entertainment and nothing more, quickly disappearing into the recesses of someone's mind. With no clear lesson to be learned, Boy Kills World just feels angry and directionless. The world within the film is underdeveloped, so everyone's motives can only be understood at a basic level, if understood at all. It's violent for the sake of being violent. It's as though the creatives behind this project just needed to get something out of their system, because a film like that hasn't been able to be made for a while. And I don't think Boy Kills World is going to be the only one like this. I wouldn't be surprised if we're going to see a mini surge of films of this ilk, if we haven't seen some already. Nobody, for instance. As a Christian, it's hard to recommend. It features R-rated violence in the name of entertainment. It's interesting from the perspective of a cultural study, or if you just want to take it at face value because you're in the mood for something dark with a light-hearted presentation. Hey, sometimes we're just in that space. But if you're constantly seeking out this type of content, then one does have to sit back and ponder at some point what is driving that desire. In terms of casting, Boy Kills World follows the current odd trend of placing unassuming actors in roles that would have once been reserved by the action hero A-lister stereotype. When thinking of the action genre, one's mind doesn't typically wander towards Bill Skarsgård, his brother, maybe, but not Bill. While we still have some actors nowadays that might shine as bright as the action stars of yesteryear, it is refreshing to see various different actors from alternative backgrounds throw their hat into the ring. Bill Skarsgård has certainly left his mark with this film. He has already proven his physical versatility in the horror genre, and given Boy Kills World's silent protagonist, only known as Boy, is a role that naturally requires extreme prowess in body language and nonverbal communication. Bill Skarsgård really gets the opportunity to take everything he has learned in the past and put it on full display here. Fully committing to the action sequences with some impressive combat moves, it wouldn't be a surprise if this isn't his last foray in this direction. It's also a delight to see X-Men's Famke Janssen again, this time as a mentally frail villain, although some more backstory wouldn't have gone astray, while Happy Death Day's Jessica Rothe packs a punch. Although I suspect it's Brett Gelman's character will end up being the most discussed in the end. Then again, Boy Kills World isn't the type of film to generate much discussion after the fact. Its loosely conceived world and light but entertaining play on tropes doesn't exactly foster longevity of thought. However, it's more interesting to follow the trends to see how such a pop culture-soaked film came into existence and whether more are down the pipeline. Moritz Mohr goes for the jugular in Boy Kills World, an action-driven fever dream that marks his directorial debut. Mohr conceived the idea with Arend Remmers and pitched it to Sam Raimi, who subsequently signed on to produce. After navigating through the COVID-19 pandemic, production finally began with Bill Skarsgård cast as its lead. After premiering at last year's Toronto International Film Festival, it's finally set to hit theaters. When watching Boy Kills World, you'll have no trouble identifying the long list of inspirations that have their place in the film's DNA. Kung fu cinema, video games, anime, and graphic novels are just some of the influences behind Mohr's go-for-broke vision. Its story is primarily a revenge tale, written for the screen by Remmers and Tyler Burton Smith. But both the visual and narrative style turns it into a delightfully bonkers and blood-drenched extravaganza that you'd swear was plucked straight from the pages of a comic book. Set in a near-future dystopia, a chiseled Skarsgård plays the story's deaf-mute protagonist who's known only as Boy. We learn through a smattering of flashbacks that Boy's family was murdered right in front of him by a totalitarian dictator named Hilda van der Kooi, Famke Janssen. Though just a child, Boy managed to escape but remained emotionally scarred and thirsty for revenge. We're told how he sought the help of a shaman, Yayan Ruyan, who for years has been training him to become the ultimate warrior. As Boy's rigorous and often agonizing training continues, Hilda and her power-mad family rule the unnamed city with a brutal iron fist. Nowhere is this more evident than in their annual event called the Culling. It's essentially televised mass murderer as the fascist family gathers 12 citizens from the poor side of town and make examples out of them in front of a live studio audience. While gathering victims for the New Year's show, Boy witnesses acts of unspeakable violence by Hilda's inept husband Glenn, Charlton Copley. He decides that enough is enough and sets off on his revenge-fueled campaign. Skarsgård's performance is an electric mix of physicality and expression, but he isn't alone in depicting Boy. Acclaimed voice actor H. Jon Benjamin plays Boy's inner voice who's constantly letting us know what's going in his mind. Benjamin makes for a great complement to Skarsgård, and Mohr is able to fuse them both into one fascinating and fun lead character. Meanwhile, the film features an assembly of colorful supporting characters energized by a wonderful ensemble cast. In addition to Janssen, Ruyan, and Copley, we also get Michelle Dockery as Hilda's wicked sister Melanie and Brett Gelman as her unreliable brother Gideon. Young Quinn Copeland frequently pops up as Mina, the ghost of Boy's murdered little sister. And Isaiah Mustafa and Andrew Koji are a lot of fun as the two-man self-identified resistance. But tops on the list is the fiercely intense Jessica Rothe playing the family's top enforcer. It's a dramatically different kind of role for Rothe, and she kills it. Boy Kills World is a wild and zany mashup that can be outrageously funny one second and ferociously ultra-violent the next. While the humor is a welcomed ingredient, it's the action that drives the movie. Choreographer David Sidersky unleashes some truly spectacular fight sequences. They're savage, bloody, and stylishly in tune with the film's spirited tone. There's not a lot of depth to the story, but there are some surprising twists. And Skarsgård gives us a rooting interest that we're happy to follow to the very end. Boy Kills World opens in theaters this Friday. Like most genres, the action flick evolved over the past decade. While the action once focused on big muscles and big guns, international influences inspired a shift. Boy Kills World draws from some of these high-octane martial arts and gunjitsu movies that came before. However, it also learns some of the wrong lessons from your Deadpools and bullet trains. With a reliance on video game antics and comedic tones, Boy Kills World berates the audience with random sight gags and jokes. The result is fun, but Boy Kills World feels hollow. In a futuristic oligarchy, the van der Kooi family rules with an iron fist. Led by Hilda van der Kooi, Famke Janssen, they complete a culling of peasants every year. Our protagonist, known as Boy, Bill Skarsgård, H. Jon Benjamin, and Nicholas Krovity, watched his family die at Hilda's hands. After years of training with the shaman, Yayan Ruyan, Boy makes his move to take down the van der Kooi family. On his way to kill Hilda, he must take down Gideon, Brett Gelman, Melanie, Michelle Dockery, Glenn, Charlton Copley, and their lead solider June 27, Jessica Rothe. After finding surprise allies Basho, Andrew Koji, and Benny, Isaiah Mustafa, Boy stands a fighting chance at completing his revenge. Directed by Moritz Mohr, Boy Kills World features some grade A combat. This will undeniably be the biggest takeaway from the movie, with many of the action fights proving brutal and fun. The gore effects are super stylized, and the sound feels over-designed during the longer fights. Depending on how you feel about these sequences, you will largely know how you feel about the movie. The violence has few equals among recent hits. The CGI blood and dismemberment are gnarly. Bullets rip through bodies, and limbs are squished like grapes. When Boy Kills World wants to get gross, it has no qualms about turning up the heat. There's even a drug-fueled Monty Python-inspired set piece. With quick edits and an extremely active camera, Mohr crafts moments that make Boy Kills World entertaining, if you can stomach the violence. There are also too many visual and audible gags at play. Boy Kills World is fun enough without a handful of gimmicks it pushes on the audience. While Benjamin proves helpful in establishing the levity at its heart, Boy Kills World also decides to drop his narration for significant stretches. While Benjamin delivers a rapid-fire comedic outlet, suddenly losing it showcases how out of place it feels. Additionally, fights against June 27 showcase an LED helmet that stands in for her comic book thought bubbles. It's funny the first time, but by the 10th or 11th time we get the shot, it's lost all of its power. Another character speaks in random words, allowing the filmmakers to showcase the chaotic wordplay as jokes. It's funny at first, but by the third or fourth time we watch the mashups occur, they've mostly lost their power. The choice to dive into the action with randomness proves Boy Kills World's most frustrating aspect. It's better than 2017's Suicide Squad or 2010's The Losers. Yet, at the same time, it's too focused on trying to present absurd imagery to get laughs. While this works in a sitcom or television series, it does not work over a 90-minute cohesive story. Worst of all, it distracts from the ideas and images that are working, most notably the fight choreography. The actors who suffer most from this are Skarsgård, Rothe, and Rothe. While there are certainly stunt doubles, each performer showcases impressive in-camera action chops. However, if we're constantly cutting to other random events going on, we actively cut away from the impressive visual effect occurring in sight. This either means the actors did not have the goods on this front or the directors misplaced their focus. The management of Rothe, in particular, stands out. Fans of the Raid will grow annoyed with the constant teases without kicking the story back to him. It's a shame because Rothe earned his spot in the action star pantheon long ago. Having him present feels like a tease, and they chose not to showcase his talent to the full extent. Mohr clearly has reverence for the actor, so it's curious if there's a lack of execution or a lack of belief in aspects of the movie. With Benjamin providing a literal video game voice, which only exists in the recut after Boy Kills World's TIFF premiere, seems to imply a lack of execution. Despite these qualms, Boy Kills World entertains. It's fun and, sometimes, extremely humorous. It's a bloody beat-em-up that recalls B-movies of the 1980s that existed to satiate audience bloodlust. Additionally, Gelman and Dockery are outstanding, with each performer stealing the movie from their co-stars. They know exactly what kind of role they're in, and because of that, they raise the silliness tenfold. There's a lot of fun in Boy Kills World, and makes it difficult to hold a grudge against it. Mohr seems to have the talent and vision to direct an awesome action flick. However, Boy Kills World never trusts the audience to live in these moments. Instead, it throws everything it can at the screen, falling short of its lofty ambitions. There will undoubtedly be fans that fall head over heels for Boy Kills World, but a few tweaks would have helped this reach a much larger audience. When you hear the inner voice of Boy, played by Bill Skarsgård, the voice of legendary voice actor H. Jon Benjamin, Bob's Burger, you'll know if the wonderfully anarchistic Boy Kills World is for you. It's the tonally perfect casting choice. It's both a warning and an invitation to go down a rabbit hole of the unexpected and weird dystopian world created by director Moritz Mohr and his collaborators in the story and screenplay Tyler Burton Smith and Arend Remmers. Boy Kills World isn't just a revenge film but an adroit play on the revenge film. One that is both a thrilling and, darkly, hilarious satire of the haves and have-nots that as thorny as anything in the Hunger Games. The oft-told tale of a boy trained by a sage shaman, Yayan Ruyan, to strike back at not only the ones that have killed his family but strike at the very system that placed the Van der Kooi family into power and remained there for 30 years. That system takes the form of a Seral Company state-sponsored execution TV special called The Culling. However, this tale is smart enough to take anything traditional or cliché and bend it into something altogether different. Boy Kills World takes the conventions of the revenge thriller and purposely puts them on their head. Though never for too long. There isn't a moment in the film that a bone-crushing gory action scene isn't around the corner to kick you in the head. Even in its blood-soaked ending is smart enough to not do things as they've been done before, and is better off for it. Boy Kills World stands above most action films because of the work between director Mohr and action and fight designer Dawid Siderski. The secret is the action in the film builds on character rather than spectacle. One would think that this is an obvious notion, but rarely outside Asian genre cinema does this occur. Siderski and Mohr's collaboration continually builds upon the set piece before it until the moment of the culling, which unleashes some truly deranged and inventive action beats. The other secret weapon of the film is a collaboration between actors Skarsgård and Ruyans. It isn't just because Skarsgård worked 18 months and leaned out his body to Bruce Lee-style chiseled perfection, or the fact that Ruyan is a masterful physical performer and has been since he rocked the world in The Raid. It's because the two have chemistry as master and pupil, and not a single line of dialogue is spoken between them. It's their first 10 minutes that builds the foundation the film works on and returns to in its final act. Skarsgård and Benjamin aren't the only adroit casting choices that benefit the film. In fact, the film is a murder's row of nimble performers all trying to top one another. Michelle Dockery, Charlotte Copley, Brett Gelman, and Famke Janssen, who play the Van der Kooi family, each deliver the kind of acidic, broken-down familial pettiness that is as funny and toxic as anything you'll see this year from a more respectable family drama. Copley and Gelman in particular seem to be in competition as to who can be the vilest man-baby ever to grace the silver screen. Dockery and Janssen actually do feel like sisters are equally matched as the heart-charging producers. Not to be outdone, both Isaiah Mustafa and Andrew Koji bring a very different type of manic energy as revolutionaries that help Boy get his revenge. However, it's Jessica Rothe who steals the show as the physically imposing Daft Punk-inspired assassin June 27. It doesn't take much to convince cinephiles like me to visit the film theater. In fact, it's more the opposite. It takes very strong reasons to keep me away. My personal methodology of trying to watch movies without any prior knowledge remains extremely strict, so for Boy Kills World, the presence of Bill Skarsgård, it was more than enough to spark interest in a basic premise of revenge with a clear action focus. Mohr's directorial debut brings a certain element of surprise, as the story he co-created with Arend Remmers, which they turned into a short film, is now adapted into a feature-length movie by the latter and Tyler Burton Smith, Child's Play. Recently, The Fall Guy premiered in cinemas around the world as a tribute to the stunt department and the numerous stunt doubles who are often overlooked and undervalued by the industry. In this sense, Boy Kills World is an excellent complement to that homage to stuntmen and stuntwomen, standing out due to its fight sequences filled with long, complex, purposefully over-the-top choreography, while being in sync with the naturally light tone of a flick that never takes itself too seriously, despite its R rating. Smith and Remmers' screenplay follows a fairly predictable, formulaic story driven by the vengeful arc of the unnamed deaf-mute protagonist, so Boy Kills World needs multiple layers of entertainment to compensate for the lack of narrative and character depth. Whether it's the martial arts-inspired fights or fanciful twists that raise more questions than answers, Mohr throws everything he has onto the big screen in a style reminiscent of Sam Raimi, Spider-Man, which doesn't come as a surprise since the filmmaker is one of the producers, as well as his company. Visually, Boy Kills World isn't a trip recommended for the faint of heart. The violence reaches particularly brutal levels of intensity during the film through exponentially bloodier, more disgusting sequences, such as the uninhibited nature of Peter Majasko's Hausen cinematography. From sound effects of punches, kicks, and all sorts of cutting weapons to the uncomfortable proximity to characters' skin being torn off by kitchen graters, just writing about it gives me chills. Fans of excessive yet imaginative action will have plenty to entertain them. Credit naturally goes to the stunt team, particularly Grant Hulley, Escape Room stunt coordinator, and Dawid Siderski, Black Widow action and fight designer, but also to Skarsgård and, especially, the legend Yayan Ruyan. The Raid. The former once again demonstrates an imposing presence, communicating solely through expressions and gestures, besides participating in various set pieces, while Ruyan shines in hand-to-hand combat, executing his own choreographies. Jessica Rothe, Happy Death Day, deserves much more than a superficial role with her face hidden behind a helmet for most of the runtime. That said, any excess can turn something impressive into something ordinary. Boy Kills World suffers from the same issue as the John Wick franchise, losing the right timing of when to end an action sequence. No matter how incredible the choreography and stunts are, when scenes drag on too long, aggressive fights become dance-like repetitive movements lacking the excitement, adrenaline, and impact of before, in addition to often falling into the trap of inadvertently making the hero seem invincible no matter how many blows, stabs, and shots they take. In the case of Boy Kills World, this problem is even greater due to its shallow narrative. There are no secondary arcs, attempts to surprise the viewer fall flat, and it's a story too simplistic and too concentrated on a single character, who is nothing more than a boy traumatized by his past with little capacity for independent thought. Human connections with other characters rarely grow beyond the very necessary, even after revelations that should completely alter relationships that unfortunately remain superficial. Boy Kills World finds its stage when it focuses on the cool stunts and explosion of unrestrained action that will certainly win over genre aficionados. The revenge premise never quite flies off narratively, remaining a thematically superficial, undeveloped story, but the numerous sequences of violently choreographed fights are entertaining enough to please the majority of the audience. The layer of humor fits the light tone, but beware of the complete uninhibitedness regarding the doses of blood, ruthlessness, and creative use of everyday items for combat. The standard recommendation for a weekend without plans. Apart from all of the inevitable Boy Meets World jokes that nearly everybody thought they were clever coming up with, I knew virtually nothing about the action-packed revenge story featured in Boy Kills World. However, after recently watching and reviewing The Fall Guy, one of my main complaints about that film was its ineffective pacing due to an unnecessarily complicated story. I simply wanted that film to choose a primary genre and focus on it. If that meant it wanted to be an action film, stop trying so hard with other genres like mystery, comedy, and romance, and focus on that action with a very simple MacGuffin or revenge plot, which just so happens to be exactly what's found in Boy Kills World, which now means I get to answer if that direction is indeed what I wanted or not. When he was just a child, boy, Bill Skarsgård, witnessed his entire family get murdered at the hands of the ruthless Hilda of the Van der Kooi family on live TV. In a dystopian world during the culling, an annual event where people are murdered on live TV as a scare tactic to never get on their bad side or fall out of line. Years later, Boy is trained by a shaman to be a weapon to ruthlessly kill his way to the top in order to take revenge and kill Hilda for what she has done. Movies like this, in my opinion, can never be perfect, but they can be extremely entertaining. To answer my previous question on if this was the type of movie I wanted to see when it came to The Fall Guy, the answer is a resounding yes. This has some of the best action sequences I've seen in years, and the story is just basic enough for you to root for the character and sit on the edge of your seat in bated breath until the very end. Yes, the story is weak, basic, and mostly predictable, but I'd argue you're not really watching a movie like this for the story, so it works. Think of other successful action films with basic storylines, like The Raid, Snowpiercer, Judge Dredd, and Bruce Lee's Game of Death. These films, sometimes referred to as one-person army action, work as well as they do almost because the story is basic, often reminding audiences of storylines seen in video games, where the only way is up and each battle is more difficult than the last. Additionally, the perfect lead for a film like this is undoubtedly Bill Skarsgård, who really dives into this character and makes this character his own. I'd be curious on seeing more movies with his character in a Boy Kills franchise, which I doubt will ever happen, but will be the first to endorse the idea. The fight choreography in Boy Kills World is next level, combined with absolutely stunning cinematography by Peter Majasko and editing by Lucien Barnard. The pacing from beginning to end is as astonishing as it is crazy. The people who made this film clearly have a passion for action. There is, however, a glaring negative in this film that won't get past anybody, and that's the inner dialogue of Boy. Boy is deaf and mute, so he created a fictional voice to narrate his thoughts. In this case, it's H. John Benjamin, otherwise known as Bob in Bob's Burgers. This choice was really difficult for me to handle, being a fan of Bob's Burgers and being unable to picture anybody else but Bob speaking. While some of the comedic moments worked the best for the silly voice, the serious moments were never something I bought into, because it didn't sound genuine, no matter how Skarsgård plays in the scenes. Sometimes, the voice just doesn't seem to match what Skarsgård is putting out there. As proven by other films, primarily IT, Skarsgård obviously knows how to do unique voices that are both silly and serious at the same time, so why exactly couldn't he provide the voice to his own character? Despite the glaringly obvious, and easily avoidable, negatives, Boy Kills World is still an entertaining, goofy film. The mix of comedy and action works pretty well for the most part, though it is strange to see in a film like this at times. As mentioned previously, Skarsgård does a great job embodying the character of Boy, especially when his character unexpectedly experiences confusion or distraction. In certain ways, the goofiness of the film, the well-choreographed fight sequences, and certain elements of the visuals, reminded me of Scott Pilgrim vs. The World, which is one of my favorite movies. So, that should tell you everything you need to know. Though Boy Kills World, the feature debut of German writer-director Moritz Mohr, tries its best to conjure a snarky, gory action flick a la Deadpool, a sorely lacking script, bloated runtime, and aimless direction render this revenge flick aggressively tepid. Starring Bill Skarsgård, Jessica Rothe, and Michelle Dockery, Boy Kills World follows the titular boy, Skarsgård, an orphaned young man living on the fringes of a totalitarian hellhole of a society that operates under the boot of the filthy rich van der Kooi family. When Boy's mother and sister are killed by order of the van der Koois, an incident that leaves him mute, he vows to seek revenge. Training under the tutelage of the shaman, Yayan Ruyan, he hones himself into a living weapon. If that synopsis sounds gratingly familiar, that's because it is. Boy Kills World's plot is about cliché and predictable as it gets, and the film doesn't make many attempts to explore or alter a single element of this well-trodden revenge story. Outside of the cartoonishly apocalyptic and half-heartedly stylized aesthetics, there's one clear element that the film thinks is the secret to standing out: a voice-over narration delivered by H. John Benjamin. To the film's credit, having a beloved voice actor lend their sound to a silent killer is a clever premise, and Benjamin's voice is as iconic as it is ill-fitting for Skarsgård's Boy, which is clearly the filmmaker's intent. But while hearing Bob Belcher make quips about whoever he's fighting does add some flavor to your standard, run-of-the-mill fight scene, it's a shtick that gets very tired very quickly. Boy Kills World seems to think that casting Benjamin as Boy's inner voice is a shortcut to wit and humor, but the unfortunate truth is that in a post-Marvel world, having a snarky internal dialogue mid-combat is old hat. Though Benjamin gives his lines plenty of panache, Boy Kills World's script simply doesn't have the wit, depth, or ingenuity to deliver the kind of unpredictable, offbeat action flick it thinks it is. What the script most frequently struggles with is its voice and sense of self. Despite clocking in at just under 2 hours, the film's world-building never moves beyond outlandish surface-level aesthetic choices, refusing to let the audience get to know or care about these characters beyond the tragedy inherent in their lives. Certainly, the extreme exaggerations of the van der Koois and their televised culling of citizens for entertainment are meant to be satirical, but the film never presents any thoughtful reaction to or deconstruction of their capital-driven cruelty. Similarly, Boy himself is a character who seems to exist only in broad strokes. By the time we meet him in the film, he's already been taken under Shaman's wing, and once he takes his revenge mission to the streets, there are even fewer chances to explore who Boy is. In addition to having him speak directly to the audience via Benjamin's narration, the film's other reality-bending quirk is the presence of Boy's little sister Mina, who follows Boy around as a constant reminder of his tragic past. Though Skarsgård and Benjamin both do an admirable job of selling Boy's devotion to Mina, the fact that they can't speak directly to each other, compounded by Boy being played by multiple actors at once, makes it difficult for the emotional beats between Boy and Mina to truly land. Certainly Skarsgård's puppy eyes are a formidable foe, but it's hard to truly care about Boy's supposed bond with Mina when we haven't seen it in the flesh. Quinn Copeland makes for a spirited, spunky Mina, though she too is consistently underserved by dialogue aiming for witty and more often than not ending up clunky and unfunny. Opposite Boy, Mina, and the shaman, the rest of Boy Kills World's ensemble is rounded out by a gaggle of mustache-twirling, gun-toting villains, the Van der Koys. Just as Boy is shallowly empathetic, the extent of or motivation behind the Van der Koys' caricatured cruelty is never explored, leaving little for the actors to work with in terms of character. In terms of personality, the Van der Koys are relatively interchangeable. They're all greedy, they're all violent, they're all about to meet some horrifically violent end at the hands of Boy. Some of these wannabe Hunger Games capital citizens are more memorable than others. Dockery's Melanie is initially positioned as the big bad ringleader of the family, but it's Brett Gelman's fur coat-clad Gideon who ends up being the true standout with his bone-dry delivery. Famke Janssen is a compelling third-act addition as Hilda van der Koy, and the wholeheartedness with which she throws herself into her dialogue is probably more than the film deserves. Jessica Roth's June 27, that's literally the character's name, is similarly underwritten and enters the game too late to be effectively used. Her helmet gimmick is mistakenly substituted for a personality, a truly grievous waste of a charming young talent. While the dialogue, world building, and characters may be lackluster, there's one thing that Boy Kills World can always be relied upon to deliver, and that's violence. Brutal and ultra-bloody, Boy Kills World's fight scenes border on video game-esque, with characters snapping broken bones back into place and huffing fumes to bolster their strength. With an assist from Michael Mitchell's cringe-inducing, in a good way, sound design, Boy Kills World's fight scenes are sometimes overlong, but never flat-out boring. If you're looking for the next truly singular action film, Boy Kills World isn't it. Borrowing from more successful, cohesively directed films like Deadpool, John Wick, and Kill Bill, the film's uninspired script and thin characters bog down memorable action sequences, delivering a final product that's more shtick than story. Paying homage to Jackie Chan, Japanese anime, and Monty Python and the Holy Grail, Boy Kills World has its own Black Knight-type character. Moritz Mohr's film is wildly violent and it successfully avoids becoming too precious with its inner monologue narration and stylish action. It's hard to dislike Boy Kills World because all it wants to do is entertain and showcase David Sidersky's inventive action design that features Bill Skarsgård, Jessica Rothe, Andrew Koji, and Yayan Ruhian beating people up in kitchens, hallways, and television studios. In an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, director Moritz Mohr said that he made the film because we wanted to make something that had some fun because Germany rarely has fun. There's no action movies, there's a few horror movies. It's mostly Arthurs. You can tell that Mohr and his cast definitely had fun as they all look great and help sell a high-energy experience that showcases what happens to an armpit when it meets a cheese grater. Boy Kills World revolves around a boy named Boy, Skarsgård, seeking revenge on Hilda van der Koy, Famke Janssen, the psychopathic leader of an authoritarian regime, who controls the populace by holding an annual event called the Culling. The event keeps the populace in check by forcing Hilda's most outspoken critics to battle to the death inside a television studio that broadcasts the event around the world. Boy wants revenge because Hilda killed his family and left him hung up in a tree with a noose slowly strangling him. In a good news bad news situation, Boy is saved by mentor, Ruhian, and forced to endure a decade's worth of training that involves copious drug use and enough martial arts training to ensure that when he's unleashed, he'll be able to overcome his demons, which include visions of his deceased sister that make him freeze during fights, to defeat Hilda and her murderous bodyguard named June 27, Jessica Rothe. In a unique twist, Boy becomes a deaf-mute after Hilda's attack, and since he cannot remember his own voice, his inner narration comes from one of his favorite video game characters voiced by H. Jon Benjamin. It takes a few minutes to get into the rhythm of Boy Kills World as H. Jon Benjamin's joke-heavy narration rules over the proceedings and makes you wonder if the unique storytelling device is a one-note gimmick. However, As the action kicks into gear and we are introduced to more of the world, it becomes easier to sit back and relax while Boy battles the world. The supporting cast made up of Michelle Dockery, Andrew Koji, Charlton Copley, Brett Gelman, and Isaiah Mustafa is excellent, and they all get moments to shine as they complain about owls or push carts, instead of fighting, during action scenes. It took 7 years for Mohr to get his film made in South Africa, and he credits producers Sam Raimi and Roy Lee for helping him get funding after he and David Sidersky showed them a proof-of-concept trailer and previs reel that showcased the inventive fight scenes. The long delay helped clean up the script, which is a good thing because the movie successfully walks a tightrope of stylish action and cheeky humor that could have easily slowed the move to a halt if it wasn't handled correctly. In the end, the committed performances, Rothe and Skarsgård got shredded for this movie. Likeable characters and inventive fight scenes win the day, and I totally recommend that you watch Boy Kills World. With more and more emerging filmmakers who grew up with video games and comic books, audiences have received films every so often that intensely reflect those influences. Whether or not it works, to varying degrees, a movie like Boy Kills World can still sit comfortably with other kinetically shot and highly energetic features such as Hardcore Henry, Crank, and Scott Pilgrim vs. The World, among others. For director Moritz Mohr, the straightforward, yet convoluted, story and presentation put a high emphasis on style, and it will really come down to how dizzying the mayhem on display is for the viewer. While the colorful cast and intricate action set pieces help give the film variety, it also manages to pack a lot of irreverence into what amounts to a shallow, ridiculous feature. Still, when fun is being had, it's easy to continue. Right away, one's tolerance for Boy Kills World is tested thanks to its choices regarding the lead character. No, I'm not referring to the permanent villain face Bill Skarsgård must work with while portraying Boy, a man looking to avenge his murdered family. It's the fact that Boy is a deaf mute, and we hear H. John Benjamin's voice serving as his constant inner monologue. This was the voice from Boy's favorite video game. He also frequently bickers with the ghost of his dead younger sister, Quinn Copeland. That allows for a lot of comedy, dark, twisted, or otherwise, to come into play throughout, but the choice speaks to how aggressively directed this movie is. Once on its wavelength, however, Skarsgård's efforts to serve as a vessel for action are well complemented by the facial expressions he must rely on, which only enhances Benjamin's vocal performance. Set in a post-apocalyptic world, the corrupt van der Kooi family governs much of the area Boy lives in. Led by Hilda van der Kooi, Famke Janssen, they're responsible for a frequent roundup of supposed criminals who are publicly executed to keep everyone in line. They are also media moguls who sponsor everything being seen on television, and they have legions of minions that range from scientists to super soldiers. Boy, having been trained by a shaman, the raid's Yayan Ruyan, to become the ultimate killing machine, joins up with a ragtag resistance group, Isaiah Mustafa and a hysterical Andrew Koji, to take on the van der Koois, leading to a lot of elaborate, violent fights. The action and villains are all presented as various stages and bosses in video games. Charlton Copley, Brett Gelman, Jessica Rothe, and a standout Michelle Dockery are all on board to have a blast in different ways as different versions of threats for Boy. It's the sort of supporting cast that feels entirely fitting for a feature like this, but that doesn't diminish what they add to all of this. Whether it's Copley's nervousness, Gelman's impishness, or the brute force offered by Rothe, Boy finds himself bouncing from one extreme to the next throughout his journey. Fortunately, from a story perspective, while this is all a bunch of nonsense in terms of what this movie is trying to say or how important the plot, and its various twists, end up being, there's practically a competition going on in the realm of which supporting character does best to combine exposition dumping with how game they are to go over the top in a manner only enhances the bloody mayhem taking place. For my money, it's who Koji erupts onto screen with so much life, and is only given more fun tasks once partnered with Mustafa, eventually donning an outfit that will only inspire more laughs. Not to be outdone, though, Dockery is reveling in playing up the evil of her character, balancing nefarious business practices with an eventual turn toward carnage. Speaking of carnage, this movie is a beast in terms of the fight sequences and gun battles on display. Yes, there are a lot of shaky camera movies, edits, drone shots, and other things making me feel like Mohr was a kid in a candy store when it came to the options available to him, but I can't say it doesn't feel planned out. The choreography is intense and complex in the right sort of ways. Given the constant action in this film, it's impressive to see Boy Kills World sustain the energy it is after for so long. Not hurting is the physical prowess of those who must show it. I feel like this is the most I've ever liked Skarsgård on screen because of the way he combines a sense of innocence with the hardcore warrior he's been shaped into, and this film enjoys making that visually clear. Similarly, even keeping stunt performers in mind, Rothe is also engaged in complicated fight sequences, suggesting an even more interesting film by the time these two stars are more closely aligned. Naturally, given the raid films, it's no surprise that Rothe is a force, and a master of 2v1 fight sequences. All of this could be headache-inducing for some, but I was happy to enjoy these extreme and, yes, interestingly shot scenes. In recent weeks, I've seen a variety of action flicks, including the darker and more spiritually inclined, however effective, Monkey Man, along with Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon, Part 2, The Scargiver, which was a lot of meaningless noise. Boy Kills World could be deemed in similar regard, except Mohr, the screenwriters and the performers remembered that this is ultimately about having fun. As silly, bloody, and wild as it may be, once it finds its footing, the movie hits some solid highs and finds just enough meaning in its madness. Sure, a lot of video game logic is being used to have this come together, but when using power UPS wisely, the stage can be completed just fine. We open with a deaf-mute boy, called Boy throughout, who is being trained as a fighter in a jungle by a mysterious shaman, the raid's Yayan Ruyan. Over the years the man teaches him, the boy fixates on taking revenge on the corrupt matriarch of a post-apocalyptic world who killed his family, including his young sister. We soon jump forward in time and the now fully fist-trained Bill Skarsgård heads into the dystopian city where the authorities are rounding up civilians to be part of the culling. This annual execution event attempts to keep the population in line with its oppressive regime. From the outset, there's a fair few familiar aspects culled from other totalitarian and sci-fi movies. The most obvious is The Purge and Hunger Games, but there's moments similar to what happened to Monday, Elysium, and even echoes of the slums in District 9. Speaking of which, a very welcome appearance from Charlton Copley again confirms that his presence can give even the most derivative of films a boost. A like it or loathe it voiceover may be a deal breaker from some viewers though. The Mute Boy has a running quirky narration provided throughout by comedian H. John Benjamin. As a huge fan of his lead performances in adult animations Archer and Bob's Burgers, his voice is so recognizable, and brilliant, that I wish there was even more of it. Benjamin's snarky comments also add a lot of dark comedy and much needed laughter to offset the brutal blood and gore. The action is steadily delivered throughout the narrative as Boy accidentally joins the resistance and begins to travel towards his revenge goal at the homes of the powers that be. Skarsgård's physicality, already used well in many flicks, notably IT, is a huge benefit to the film. Here he delivers the film's many fight and shootout scenes admirably, with kitchen bust UPS and skirmishes on a kids' TV set being both bloody but also funny with murderous serial mascots and death by camera thrown into the mix. An unknown woman mystery revealed late in the game is obvious 5 minutes into the film, and although the moving camera and well choreographed fight scenes are impressive, the humor may not work for everyone. The film certainly needs a trim. 2 hours for a post-apocalyptic revenge actioner seems overkill, but it's not without its ferocious charms. Get yourself into a Saturday night popcorn with mates mood, as Boy Kills World would be a good addition to a movie marathon alongside similar unrelenting smashers like Crank and Guns Akimbo. For the rest, I suspect it will turn off as many as it turns on, but action aficionados will enjoy the non-stop carnage and fun mayhem thrills. Boy Kills World is a new action/dystopia/comedy goof that I could have guessed would annoy the shit out of many people even if I hadn't already seen the evidence. You know, it's got that splattery paint, sarcastic smiley face type of aesthetic. From the trailers I wondered if I might be one of those people, but I actually really liked this thing until almost the end. I found its brazenly show-offy oddballery pretty charming. It looks at you like, yeah, I know this is a lot of unnecessary gimmicks and trinkets, but I like that shit, what are you gonna do about it? Nothing. Please, continue. I think Glaive Robber called it accurately in the Rebel Moon Part 2, the Scargiver comments when he wrote, old Vern would have passionately hated it. But maybe not contemporary Vern. It's a frenetic, hyperactive, smart-alecky, and casually violent movie, so every review besides this one compares it to a Ryan Reynolds comic book movie that's not Blade Trinity or Green Lantern. If you must compare it to modern superhero movies, I'd say it's more Suicide Squad, The Suicide Squad and Birds of Prey, but that didn't even occur to me until now. I was thinking more along the lines of Polar, Smoke and Aces, Accident Man, a little Shoot 'em Up, a little Kingsman. Hell, maybe a little Crank and Crank, High Voltage. I hated those, but some people swear by 'em. Actually, the comic book movies it made me think of are those ones we used to get in the 90s where you never heard of the comic before or again, but they created a whole stylized alternate universe for it on a medium-sized budget. I always appreciated them for that, and this is better than many of them. Unlike this review, Boy Kills World gets to the point immediately. The unnamed protagonist, who we'll call Boy, lives in some horrible totalitarian future ruled by a family called the Vanderkoys. Every year they do a thing called the culling, where they pick out 12 undesirable/enemies and execute them on TV. To keep the streets safe, they say. A couple minutes into the movie, Boy's family have already been murdered by fascists and he's buried in the jungle sucking stink bugs through a bamboo shoot for sustenance as part of his training by the shaman, who's played by the coolest person you could possibly be trained by, Yayan Ruyan, motherfucking Mad Dog from The Raid, his minimal dialogue dubbed by Francois Chow, G.I. Joe, the movie, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, The Secret of the Ooze, Rapid Fire, City of Industry. And they actually give him the time and space to be awesome. So yeah, this is kind of like Hunger Games, except it says fuck Hunger Games, we're doing a kung fu revenge movie. And it's a pretty straightforward one of those in the sense that it has that mentor, training montages, a bunch of well-done fights, a funny ally or two, some despicable bad guys, a cool-looking henchwoman, a gimmicky weapon. But in most other senses it's bouncing all over the place, like its soundtrack that I took for eclectic international needle drops, but they turned out to be original songs by L. Michaels Affair, a band I already love. The riskiest choice, Grown Up Boy, Bill Skarsgård, John Wick, Chapter 4, who is deaf and mute, doesn't remember what he sounded like when he could talk, and in his head he sounds like the announcer from his favorite video game, Super Dragon Punch Force 2. So the movie is narrated from his perspective but with the voice of H. John Benjamin, Archer, Bob's Burgers, and when I realized that from the commercials I thought it might kill the movie for me. Instead it fit right into the skewed, cartoonish world of the movie. He's also food and sleep deprived and breathes lots of opium or whatever it is the shaman smokes, so he's always hallucinating. When he goes on his revenge mission he imagines his little sister Mina, Quinn Copeland, daughter of Punky Brewster on the Made for Peacock sequel series, accompanying him, like the clown girl in Terrifier 2. She's not his conscience or anything, she mostly distracts him and messes up his plans. Since she's imaginary he can argue with her speaking out loud and him with his inner voice. The people live in an unspecified city that seems rebuilt from old parts after a disaster, if not apocalypse. But the Vanderkoys live like oligarchs in mansions. The head of the family, Hilda, Famke Janssen, Lord of Illusions, who Boy blames for killing his mother, apparently went crazier and hasn't been seen in public for years. But on the day of the culling, Boy has an encounter with Hilda's sister Melanie, Michelle Dockery, Hannah, her cheeseball TV host husband Glenn, Charlton Copley, Monkey Man, the A-Team, and her brother/speechwriter Gideon, Brett Gelman *, without remorse. After witnessing a massacre of civilians, Boy decides to ditch his long game and try to kill Hilda today. As the shaman warns him, he's not ready, but he's pretty damn good. While battling a bunch of the Vanderkoy soldiers, he frees an imprisoned resistance fighter named Basho, played by Andrew Koji, Snake Eyes, Bullet Train, Warrior, who's always great in martial arts roles, and it turns out he's even better as comic relief. One of my favorite jokes in the movie is that he never notices Boy is mute. Another good one is that his escape plan is for Boy to run out and kill everybody while he hides behind a cart doing cart stuff. But they did hire Andrew Koji after all, so later it turns out he can really fight. The only surviving member of Basho's army is Benny, Isaiah Mustafa, the Three Stooges, whose lips Boy has trouble reading, hopefully because of his beard, not because he's black, so we hear him speaking only gibberish. That's funnier in concept than in execution, but most of the rest of the humor worked for me, even some jokes I saw coming from a mile away. The aforementioned cool-looking henchwoman is for some reason named June 27th, and for a while her face is hidden behind a motorcycle helmet with a reader board visor with which she speaks through text. I think it's in the tradition of video games or cartoons where character design comes first. You gotta assume it's just something Mohr thought would look cool, I agree, and / or a way for her to communicate with Boy while her stunt double's face is hidden, because later she takes the helmet off and can talk and everything. There doesn't seem to be a real purpose for it. I'm okay with that because she's played by Jessica Rothe, who is so good in the Happy Death Day movies, and I enjoyed her here too. This is a legit action movie with more fisticuffs than guns, but lots of those too. You know, there are the movies where people fight, and then there's this kind, where it's a meticulously choreographed series of beats, a rhythmic barrage of every cool move, improvised weapon, and gore gag they can imagine. Action designer / action director / fight coordinator / second unit director Dawid Siderski says he got to choreograph the camera movements for the fights. The way it spins around with the fighters flipping and flying and parkouring through all this mayhem is controversial, but to me more invigorating than disorienting. It's funny that I've gone from one of the most stubborn early opponents of Shakikum to not understanding why all my friends are so sensitive to camera movement. I guess it's too much for some people to process, but it's not shaky, it's not obscuring the action to give an impression of something you never see. It's more like you're holding onto the back of the action and being dragged along behind it. I'm pretty sure Siderski also plays Dave, or I guess a memorable opponent who keeps getting up like a zombie even after Boy snaps his jaw loose. Siderski is from Poland and has an impressively international resume: assistant martial arts choreographer on Ong Bak 3, Thailand, stunt coordinator under Samurai, Germany, fight trainer on Kingsman, The Secret Service, England, assistant fight choreographer on Manikarnika, The Queen of Jhansi, India, choreographer on The Other Path, Turkey, also on the stunt teams for Wonder Woman and Black Widow. I think this will be a big breakout for him. But part of the reason it comes off so good is because Skarsgård is incredible to watch. He's got that weirdly shaped face, those unique eyes, he's doing nonverbal acting, and it's no surprise he's good at that, though the comedic timing part may be new for him. Meanwhile he's literally throwing himself into this action-heavy part, rolled and tossed around by Mad Dog, flying and slamming into things. I'm impressed by whatever amount of the acrobatic choreography and parkour is actually him, but also he's just such a unique physical specimen. He's gotten himself ripped, his abs are ridiculous, but he's not bulky. His neck is like a tree, not a tree stump. He has these long limbs and giant hands, he looks so much like a drawing. One point I really liked from the Siderski interview I linked above is that Boy fights in low stances because he learned from a guy who's 14 inches shorter than him. Jesus Christ, this Skarsgård family. Of course we've had many years to love Stellan. I'll mention Ronin, Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist and in order of disappearance as a couple of his greatest hits. Alexander really impressed me in The Legend of Tarzan and then fulfilled his thick-necked barbarian destiny in the masterpiece The Northman and then went another direction in Infinity Pool. Now Bill we knew from IT had serious game in the creepy faces department, with a side hustle playing prissy freaks like in Atomic Blonde and John Wick Chapter 4, and he played off of those qualities by being suspiciously charming in Barbarian. But I had no idea he had this in him. Suddenly I'm more interested in the Crow remake, and the anticipation for Robert Eggers' Nosferatu has gotten even more intense. I'll also be interested to see what director Moritz Mohr does next. In the tradition of Mama and Evil Dead, 2013, producer Sam Raimi saw a brief and simple short and somehow knew that person could make a good feature. Mohr established the basic concept and style in a pitch short he wrote with Arend Remmers, who is credited for the final screenplay along with Tyler Burton Smith, Child's Play remake. I love the action, most of the cast, and the general colorful attitude of Boy Kills World, but you probably need more than that. And the reason this was really hitting for me, and then hit a brick wall, is what it says to me about the real world. Seeing these cruel, fascist bullies torment people, it's pretty normal movie villainy, but it just rings so burningly true at this moment in history. It's the soldiers massacring people in Gaza right now, it's the American soldier cops coming in their pants at the opportunity to beat the shit out of college students for protesting those same massacres, it's the other guy and his cult of losers who all that stuff may very well put back into office next year, and if so I sincerely expect them to be doing some sort of executions. Maybe not televised. Or maybe they would be. We got some terrible times right now and there could be some way worse ones on the horizon, feels like to me. So a movie like this can be cathartic. I don't actually believe in pancake silating the fascists to death, but I like to see it in a movie. There are two dystopian moments here that I think are kind of profound, whether or not they were intended that way. One is when Boy sees a young woman, Jane DeWitt, Slumber Party Massacre 2021, at a flower stand, smiling at him. She has these huge, piercing eyes and they stare into each other like they're stuck in a two-way tractor beam. She gives him a flower, he's touched by it, we see him falling in love. And then she says, excitedly, the Vanderkoys are coming. There's a truth to that, the idea that you think you have a connection with someone, in this case because of attraction to physical beauty and presence. But then you find out this person believes shit that you cannot abide by. They're going down a path you cannot follow. People talk about society being too divided, but if one side is a fan of the street executions, in my opinion it's better to divide from them than to say tomato. The other thing that got me is a sillier one. Boy is always mourning his little sister, and one of his good childhood memories involves eating Frosted Pop cereal with her. It's such a positive association for him that sometimes in his memories he's just walking around carrying a box of the stuff. As an adult, when he's infiltrating a broadcast of the culling, it's sponsored by Frosted Pops, so there's a big fight against executioners dressed as pirates and pineapples and stuff. In all likelihood this was just a gag to add color to the proceedings. It's an outdated style of advertising, doesn't seem like something that would really be a thing, just an excuse for a fight gimmick. But at the same time, we do get attached to these totems of our youth. Cartoons, Star Warses, toys, video games. They implant in us as we're growing up. If we still love them as adults, they have additional personal meaning to us based on that context, we take them very seriously. And in the end many of them are just brands, products sold by corporations, which, especially these days, are very likely a negative force in our society. Greedy motherfuckers sucking the earth dry to sell us enough crap to inflate the value of their company for some fucking stock market scam. So what I'm saying is there is something very true about a guy investing a particular sugary cereal of his youth with great personal meaning and then seeing it sponsor his enemy's live executions TV special. That's modern living right there. Toward the end of Boy Kills World I was pretty much ready to call a press conference to announce that this movie rules. but then there's this intentionally shocking story choice that really changes things, and left me feeling kind of betrayed. This really is a huge spoiler, so I recommend if you have interest in the movie you don't read this last part yet. Hopefully this is just my own hang-up and it won't bother you as much, if at all. This film, directed by Moritz Mohr, screenplay by Tyler Burton Smith, story by Arend Remmers, based on Boy Kills World, produced by Sam Raimi, starring Bill Skarsgård, cinematography Peter Majasko, edited by Lucien Barnard, music by Ludwig Furzel, production companies Nthibah Pictures, distributed by Constantin Film, release date September 9, 2023, running time 111 minutes, countries United States, language English, box office $3.3 million.